Members, I call the Environment, Natural Resources, Policy, and Finance Committee to order. A quorum is present. Vice Chair Burkle, have you had a chance to review the minutes?
I have, Mr. Chair, and I would move the adoption of the minutes from Thursday, March 20th.
Any questions on the minutes? Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see that Mr. Harris is down here from the Minnesota Association of Townships. Was that the organization he was testifying on behalf of, or was he testifying on behalf of the Minnesota Public Lands Coalition? And I know I was chairing at that time, so I should probably know the answer, but.
Representative Falconer.
It was the townships.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Members, any more questions? All right, members. What was the date? There we go. Members, all those in favor of moving the minutes from March 20th, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes are carried from March 20th, 2025. So obviously DNR is here. It's a big day. We get an overview. So Commissioner, if you would introduce yourself for the record, that'd be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources budget. I am Commissioner Sarah Stroming from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. I'm here today with Assistant Commissioner Bob Meyer. Our Chief Financial Officer, Mary Robison, is right behind me. We also have several of our DNR division directors and members of our legislative team. The governor's budget recommendation for Minnesota DNR does reflect the broader theme of his overall budget, which is a need to balance the state budget during a time of fiscal constraint while providing critical investments that contribute to a high quality of life throughout the state. Just to give you a quick overview of our agenda, before diving into the nuts and bolts of the new budget items proposed for DNR, we do want to provide just a little bit of context about our work, how we approach the budget process, the wide variety of sources that fund DNR work, and how our divisions differ in the funding sources that they use. And then after providing that context, we will present our specific budget proposals. And then as always, we look forward to your questions. Minnesota's abundant, diverse, and healthy natural resources define our state and make it an incredible place to live. That doesn't happen by accident. It requires commitment and collaboration across a diverse and broad range of Minnesotans. The Minnesota DNR is deeply committed to working with Minnesotans to conserve and manage these resources, provide outdoor recreation opportunities, and provide for commercial uses of natural resources in a way that creates a sustainable quality of life. The DNR must proactively address and manage ongoing and emerging critical natural resources issues facing Minnesota. Land use changes, invasive species spread, and a changing climate all create challenges to maintaining the diversity and quality of our natural resources. As well, we know more Minnesotans than ever before are enjoying our outdoor opportunities and in new and different ways than in the past. Our strategic goals best position the DNR to address the changing conditions of our natural environment and economy, as well as the changing needs of Minnesotans to connect to the outdoors. We can protect and manage our natural resources in ways that benefit the environment and economy while serving the diverse needs of everyone who calls Minnesota home. In working with the governor on the fiscal year 26-27 biennial budget, DNR took a collaborative one DNR approach, considering state and agency strategic priorities. Our division directors work together to identify our most critical work and priorities. Our fiscal year 26-27 budget proposals are limited in number and are well tuned to the fiscal realities of the state. Facing a state structural budget imbalance, we explored opportunities to create efficiencies, reallocate funds, and examine the interactions across state, federal, and other available funds and across division operations. We are confident that our collaborative interdivisional approach to identifying and prioritizing budget needs will serve the DNR, the resources we manage, and the people we serve well. So I want to shift now the view to look at DNR's proposed budget for fiscal year 26 and 27. This budget represents a total budget of $1.6 billion across all DNR funds. And I'll note that while the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund and Clean Water Fund are included in DNR's budget recommendations, the Outdoor Heritage Fund and Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund recommendations travel separately from the governor's budget process, and so they are not captured here. In the upper right-hand corner of the pie chart that you see, you will see that 29% of DNR's budget comes from the general fund. This plays a critical role in the agency's budget. It's also important to note that a significant portion of DNR's general fund dollars are passed on to other entities, including payments to tribal nations in accordance with treaties and payments to counties for payment in lieu of taxes. The next largest portion of DNR's budget is the Natural Resources Fund, which is made up of 20 different funds, each designated for different purposes, such as forest management, mineral management, water recreation, and parks. These funds each receive the relevant fee revenues, such as vehicle registrations for ATVs and other motorized vehicles and state park permit revenues, but they also contain other funding sources, such as gas tax allocations for motorized vehicle accounts, and again, lottery in lieu dollars. Our Game and Fish Fund represents 19% of DNR's budget and receives sources of funding from hunting and fishing license fees, federal dollars, and lottery in lieu. It is important to note that fees are not priced to recover the full costs of our programs. They are rather one revenue source contributing to a broader, more complex picture of funding for Minnesota's environment. Each of these different funding sources plays an important part within DNR's overall budget. I know there is interest in federal funding at this time, so you will also see that agency-wide, federal funds are 11% of our agency budget. And in a moment, when I go through division slides, you'll see how federal funds impact each of the divisions differently. So before we walk through the governor's budget proposals, I do want to share how each of the DNR divisions fit into the bigger picture. And it's important to note as we walk through this, each division relies on a different source of funding mix. And so I think it's an important piece of understanding how DNR's budget works. The Parks and Trails Division manages parks and trails through various funding sources, including the general fund, state parks account, and state parks lottery in lieu account. Parks and Trails Legacy Fund and the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund funding also contribute, though these funds have constitutional restrictions. Increasing operational and maintenance costs due to inflation are a challenge, which is why the governor's budget includes a proposal to address rising expenses and ensure the system remains exceptional. In the Fish and Wildlife Division, General Fund supports just 6% of that division's work, including funding for chronic wasting disease management and surveillance. The Game and Fish Fund is the primary funding source for the Fish and Wildlife Division, contributing 68% of the division's FY 26-27 budget. This includes the federal Pittman-Robertson, Dingell-Johnson funds for fish and game conservation purposes. Forestry is one of the areas heavily supported by General Fund at DNR. The General Fund includes the open appropriation for fire suppression. The General Fund is also one of the major sources of forest management funding, along with the Forest Management Investment Account, or FMIA, as well as the Heritage Enhancement Account in the Game and Fish Fund. Our Ecological and Water Resources Division has one of the most segmented budgets, as you'll see on this slide, with a number of dedicated funding sources that all work together. Of note here is the amount of federal funds that support EWR's work. General Fund dollars support EWR's aquatic invasive species and water protection work, and as fees alone don't cover the cost of these programs. The governor's budget recommendations include 2 proposals to address these rising costs and reduce the general fund's burden, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The Enforcement Division's largest funding source is the Game and Fish Fund, with additional support from 7 accounts within the Natural Resources Fund, including motorized vehicle accounts for ORV and snowmobile enforcement. The general fund makes up about 20% of the budget, with approximately $3 million allocated specifically to AIS-related enforcement. The unrestricted portion of the general fund is the only source of funding for public safety deployments, as designated funds cannot be used for these activities. And this is why the governor's budget recommendations also include a proposal to address these costs, which we'll discuss in a moment. Our Lands and Minerals Division is our smallest division. The majority of LAM's budget is dedicated funding. You'll see the largest portion of the budget consists of special revenue funds. And a good example of LAM's special revenue fund is spending for a real estate program in which LAM provides real estate services for a variety of projects that are funded across many of our funds. The general fund contributes about 24% of the division's budget, supporting minerals management activities like reclamation, research, and evaluation to make science-based decisions related to mining regulation. And then finally, operations support includes services such as communications, human resources, legal, finance, budget, fleet, building services, safety, disaster response, and our Office of Access and Inclusion, as well as DNR's leadership costs. These activities are paid for through internal billings, which show up here as special revenue. That is the overview of the agency's budget and each of the division's budget. And I do now want to transition into the proposals that are part of the governor's budget. And as we look at the proposals we covered today, we want to start with gas permitting and leasing. These budget items that you see here on the slide are consistent with the legislatively mandated Gas Resources Technical Advisory Committee, or GTAC, recommendations. And as many of you will probably remember, in 2024, the legislature directed DNR to build a temporary regulatory framework for gas production to be implemented while a more permanent framework is developed. The GTAC shared that proposed temporary framework with the legislature earlier this year, and we know that conversation is ongoing. Implementing both the temporary and permanent framework will require programs to conduct permitting for the extraction of gas reserves and to manage the leasing of state lands and mineral rights. We have already received significant interest for gas-related leases, further emphasizing the importance and need for these regulatory programs. So the first proposal is for hydrogen and helium permitting. This proposal at $1.3 million is intended to focus on gas resource development permits, environmental review, financial assurance, and other regulatory work. This will fund 4 permitting positions. Additionally, a new gas leasing program will handle the leasing for gas exploration and development, including title research, filing of necessary documentation, reviewing exploration plans, and drill site inspections. This $660,000 proposal will fund 2 gas leasing positions, which will include 1 attorney and 1 production site inspector. Our next set of proposals are critical investments that support continued DNR operations. The first proposal in this category relates to legal costs. And as many of you have heard in previous budget conversations, in the normal course of business, DNR regularly makes natural resource and environmental regulatory, leasing, public land, resource management, and related decisions that take a range of other actions that affect Minnesotans. Over the past decade, we've seen an increase in highly contested matters from multiple parties with multiple views on particular issues, and this has imposed an entirely different scale of legal costs on the DNR due to the complexity, duration, and scope of these actions. The cost of defending DNR decisions within program budgets would be detrimental to the services those programs provide. And so this one-time proposal, similar to previous proposals and appropriations we've had, invests $4 million from the general fund for legal costs. Our next proposal relates to situations in which DNR conservation officers are sometimes called upon to aid in general public safety. To be effective when they are called on in these situations, they must be ready with the proper training on how to best assist in these situations. This $840,000 general fund investment will provide the ongoing training and equipment needed to assist in public safety responses for which we cannot use our dedicated conservation funds. And then finally, the cost of doing business rises each year, as we all know. Examples of rising staff-related costs include employer-paid healthcare contributions, FICA and Medicare, other salary and compensation-related costs. Other operating costs where we see increases include utilities, gasoline, utilities, vehicles, IT costs, and contracts for core services such as septic pumping and portable toilets. This proposal is funded by $5.4 million from the general fund and $11.5 million spread across other funds. And I will note that this proposal is only partially funding the operational increases for this next biennium. So I'm going to shift now to our fee proposals that are included in the governor's budget. These proposals provide support for DNR programs and services, both directly and through the operating adjustment that I just mentioned, while reducing general fund spending. Our first proposal focuses on identifying, preventing the spread of, and managing the impacts of aquatic invasive species. Aquatic invasive species, or AIS, such as zebra mussels, Eurasian water milfoil, and certain carp species can harm our lakes, rivers, streams, wetlands, water quality, and wildlife habitats. This investment of $5.7 million is funded by a sliding scale increased AIS surcharge. So, for example, the AIS surcharge for pleasure craft less than 17 feet, this is the state's most common type of registered boat, will increase to $25 from $10.60 from a 3-year license period. So right now, our AIS surcharge is a flat $10.60 across the board. We are proposing to move to a sliding scale, so the larger your watercraft, the more surcharge you will pay. This proposal is taking a 3-pronged approach to addressing aquatic invasive species. First, this additional revenue will provide grants to lakes associations, tribal nations, and local government units for invasive aquatic plant management, including pilot projects with local partners. Second, it increases DNR's assistance for vegetation management plans and permitting, as well as AIS grant management support. And finally, it provides funding, stable funding, to the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center at the University of Minnesota to help sustain their research program and ensure the long-term viability and accessibility of AIS management tools. This proposal also reduces general fund expenditures by $660,000 by covering some of DNR's existing AIS program activities in the Natural Resources Fund and reducing the AIS account structural deficit. Our next fee proposal focuses on sustainable management of the state's groundwater, which is a crucial resource that supplies most of Minnesota's drinking water and agricultural irrigation needs. Community and business growth have increased the demand for groundwater and led to well interference issues and water use conflicts that require additional complex technical analyses. These increases in quantity and complexity of permitting applications have outstripped current resources, creating an application backlog. This proposal also more appropriately reflects the value of Minnesota's groundwater. This $4.4 million proposal increases water use permit and application fees and water use fee rates and will increase DNR's permitting responsiveness and the ability to evaluate complex permitting projects. So as an example, the first water use fee tier is up to 50 million gallons of water per year. It is a flat rate, and under the proposal, it would increase from $140 to $200 per permit. And 85% of agricultural irrigation permits fall under this category, so you know this is a heavily used example. This proposal also reduces general fund expenditures by $3.36 million and instead covers these existing activities in the Natural Resources Fund. And then the final fee proposal centers around ensuring that DNR continues providing the best state park and recreation experiences to a historically high number of visitors. This $850,000 proposal is funded by increasing daily and annual vehicle permits and license plate fees. It helps sustain current operations and maintenance at state park and recreation areas. I want to emphasize that without this increase, Minnesotans will see service reductions in our state park and recreation areas. The specific proposal is the same proposal we brought forward 2 years ago that did not advance. It is to increase the daily permit fees from $7 to $10 and the annual permit fee from $35 to $45. I also want to highlight that the governor's budget includes several general fund reductions in light of the state's fiscal outlook. The first is that we will be returning $3.9 million of general fund that was unused from a prior appropriation for drought-killed seedlings. The anticipated demand exceeded the actual demand for these dollars, and the program was able to successfully meet the needs of forest landowners and to replant seedlings killed during the droughts of 2021 and 2022 without using the entire appropriation. So we propose to return those dollars to the general fund. The governor's budget, in the revised budget, also proposes to eliminate the general fund portion of DNR's local trail connection grants. This program helps provide short trail connections between communities in nearby cultural and recreational resources. While this eliminates the general fund portion of the program's funding mix, it does maintain the lottery and lieu support for local trail grant connections. And then, as I previously mentioned, both the AIS surcharge increase and the proposed groundwater fee increase also are accompanied with general fund reductions. So the final pieces of our budget package include the one-time proposals from both the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund and the Clean Water Fund. The funds used from legacy fund sources are designed to supplement, not supplant, existing funding streams. And this means that these funds are not intended to reduce traditional agency budget sources such as the general fund. They are to accelerate or advance work on top of that. The Parks and Trails Legacy Funds support parks and trails of statewide and regional significance by connecting more people to the outdoors, creating new and expanded outdoor opportunities, revitalizing existing infrastructure, restoring natural resources, and increasing interagency coordination and research. We have used the Parks and Trails Legacy Funds to connect people to the outdoors through programs such as our popular I CAN program, which provides hands-on introductory skill development opportunities to new and diverse audiences, and by increasing access to state parks and recreation areas through the DNR's State Parks Library Pass program. Legacy funds also made it possible to develop the Shipwreck Creek Campground at Split Rock Lighthouse State Park, and they have also played a role in reintroducing American Plains bison at Minneopa State Park. We also know that management of our water resources is one of the most important and challenging issues facing Minnesota, and as part of a statewide watershed-based approach to water management, the DNR's Clean Water Fund budget recommendations will help local partners plan for and implement water quality improvement strategies through technical assistance, maintaining lake, river, and aquifer data, supporting forest stewardship, restoring native freshwater mussels, and replacing problem culverts. This year's Clean Water Fund budget recommendations include 10 DNR proposals listed here on this slide that advance the goals of the Clean Water Fund. Both the Parks and Trails Legacy and Clean Water Fund totals that I've just shown on these slides reflect the governor's revised budget, which accounts for a revenue correction that was made across all legacy funds. So just before we close out, I know Chair Heinzman requested some updates on spending from the last biennium as part of this presentation, and these updates cover several large one-time general fund appropriations. So we're going to share this information, and then we'll be happy to take your questions. So this chart shows a number of those large one-time general fund appropriations we received. The first is for relief grants. There is significant demand for relief grants across Minnesota. These fund tree planting in communities seeking to address the impacts of emerald ash borer and communities that are looking to maintain important tree canopy cover. We do anticipate that we will issue our next request for proposal by the summer, and that request for proposal will occupy all of the remaining funds. The next appropriation was an appropriation that was connected to the transfer, the decommissioning and transfer of the Upper Sioux Agency State Park. It was funding that came with that transfer to offer replacement outdoor recreation opportunities in that region. We have committed funds to the City of Granite Falls, Yellow Medicine County, and Renville County for outdoor recreation facility investments that they maintain in that area near the former Upper Sioux Agency State Park. And we're in the process of finalizing agreements with those local government units. We also received an appropriation to address the threat of chronic wasting disease to the state's white-tailed deer herd and to monitor Cervidae farms. This appropriation was available to us through fiscal year 29, and it will be spent within this timeline. This appropriation is critical in funding our response, particularly to some new discoveries of CWD in areas where we had not previously detected it. We had an appropriation for enhancing prairies and grasslands on WMAs. While we have not started most of the restoration work, we do anticipate being able to complete that work. The planning work is underway, and as I'm sure you can all appreciate, it takes some planning before you can actually begin constructing those restoration projects. And then the last one that we're showing here is our Get Out More, Modernize Outdoor Recreation Experiences appropriation. And I'm going to dive into that a little bit deeper here in a couple of slides. So that was an appropriation of $150 million. It included $110 million in one-time general fund dollars available for 6 years, as well as $40 million in bonding dollars. The Get Out More initiative invests in transformational infrastructure and equipment. I'll just note it is not operational funding. All of the funds, all of the $150 million have been programmed. The places that are going to receive investments have been publicized. They are shown or listed on the DNR's Get Out More webpage on our website, and the public and all of you can view that there. This table that's up on the screen now shows our anticipated encumbrances through August of this year and then through March of next year, so a year from now. And as you can see, we anticipate considerable additional progress through this construction season as well as the next construction season. We anticipate that $35.5 million will be spent by this time next year, and another 31.3 will be encumbered. So about 60 plus million will be spent or encumbered a year from now. And what that tells us is we are on track, exactly as we'd planned, to spend the full amount by fiscal year 29, which was the end of the appropriation. And just to further demonstrate how we are tracking the progress at DNR, I wanted to share this pie chart. This shows the current status of all of the projects included in Get Out More. And The spending in this program, because a lot of the work is related to construction projects, the spending is not linear. We spend a little bit on the planning, a little bit on the design, and then the bulk of it is spent on the construction. And so the earlier project phases, such as planning, design, procurement, which typically occur in those first 2 to 3 years of a project, they only account for about 10 to 20% of the project's total cost. So as you can see here, 59% of the Get Out More projects are currently in this phase. There's another 6% in active construction and 3% complete. But as you can see, the majority, there's only 12% that have not started any planning yet. And so dollars have been expended. We're just waiting for the time when we are ready for the construction to expend the rest of the dollars there. So with that, Mr. Chair and members, I want to thank you again for having us here to talk more about the DNR's budget, including the governor's fiscal year 26-27 budget recommendations. And I or any other members of the DNR's team who are here today are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Stroman. We have member questions, starting with Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do have a couple questions. Commissioner number one, thank you for being here. Just a quick welcome to the committee. I think this is your first time this session to be with us, so we're glad to see you. I first actually wanted to ask a quick question relating to the previous 2 bienniums and what to expect for this coming biennium. So I just went back and looked at the budget for the EWR, Ecological and Water Resources. And I looked back to the previous biennium, not the one that we're in right now, the previous biennium, where the budget was $168.2 million. And then the budget we're currently in right now, it was $280 million. Do you have an idea of like what was the totality of that additional $112 million? And is that expected to be ongoing?
Commissioner Stroman.
Mr. Chair, Representative Schultz. I'm looking at Director Smith. We are going to have to get back to you on that. It's a great question, but I don't think unless our.
I can talk in general about the increase on EWR.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, Representative Schultz, maybe we could answer it in 2 pieces. One, I suspect some of it is operating increase, just general cost of running. Our CFO, Mary Robison, can sort of at a high level talk about what's going on, and then we could provide more specifics to the committee later.
Please come forward, introduce yourself for the record, and if you need him to repeat the question, we can do that. Otherwise, I think maybe you might have heard it.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much. Mary Robison, Chief Financial Officer for the DNR, and I did hear the question, thank you. And we will follow up with additional details around EWR's budget in particular, but I wanted to address the nature of your question overall. So when we think about DNR's budget in 24-25 over previous biennia, the department did receive a number of one-time appropriations as part of that session. And there were considerable dollars there, including some in EWR. And we talked about some of those. The commissioner went through some of those in the budget presentation, such as Get Out More. It's important to note that the only ongoing funding that the DNR received in 24-25 were one of 2 things. There was an operating adjustment to the DNR for inflation, and then some ongoing dollars for CWD response. And those were the only 2 ongoing items.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So then, as we look at the budget and when we're putting this together over the coming few months, then I will expect that we'll be far closer to where the $168 million with operating adjustment to be. But that really wasn't, the bigger question that I wanted to ask, which is just when you look at the unspent and unencumbered dollars, when you consider a $6 billion, and this is more for the commissioner. When you consider, the fact that we have a challenging horizon ahead of us, a desire in this committee and in every committee to really take a look at what is our ongoing need. I'm really curious, for you, have you contemplated using that which is unspent and unencumbered for other priorities and to help us address the budgetary challenges that we have? And if so, do you have a priority list that you would like to highlight of what would be a priority item that we could go after and descending from there?
Commissioner Stroman.
Chair Heinzman and Representative Schultz. As I said at the outset, we took a real hard look and a departmental look at our budget at the beginning, recognizing that we were in a different fiscal climate than we have been the last couple of biennia. And so, one, that is why our list of new budget asks is very small this session. It addresses a legislatively mandated program in terms of the gas permitting and leasing, and then it addresses some user fee increase, some small operating increases for the department, and as I said, does not cover our full operating increase. So what that means is we are already taking some service level cuts across the department there. So that is a place that we have reprioritized. And then the other places where we are asking for new funds, they are from user fees. And that is because we know that in Minnesota, people are generally willing to pay for the things that they desire to use when it comes to the environment and natural resources. We saw that with Minnesota overwhelmingly renewing the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, for example. So we know that park users are willing to pay a little bit more in order to maintain their access to high-quality park areas. We know that Minnesota boaters are willing to pay a little bit more in order to have continued access to all of the lakes and boating experiences that they have. So that's why we have proposed those things. That is a very slimmed down, prioritized list already. In terms of using the one-time appropriations, we have not looked at reprogramming those. Frankly, the money for Get Out More, for example, that $150 million investment is a transformational investment. It has not been seen in Minnesota for a generation and likely will not be seen in Minnesota for another generation. And that is one of the things that, as I and other members from the DNR team have traveled around the state, Minnesotans are most excited about. They use our boat ramps, but they want them to function so they can get on and off the lakes safely. They use the state parks and they want modern and high-quality experiences. Our anglers want modern and functional fish hatcheries that are gonna, make sure that angling opportunities are there in the future. So I think it would be, from our perspective, not the appropriate thing to do to reprogram those dollars to things and disappoint Minnesotans on the things that they have been promised.
Representative Schultz, any follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess there are a few things that you highlight here that you didn't mention, so maybe those are at the top of the list of the things that you would be willing to address. Things like, the enhancement on the WMAs, has a nice chunk here, which would more than cover what your request is from the general fund. And then I've struggled with this question since just engaging with the agency this session. So I think everybody in this room loves state parks, and it appears as though we are seeing an increase in popularity and more people going to state parks. And when we think about taxes and fees generally, we always talk about if you broaden the base, you don't have to charge as much. So I'm wrestling with why we need to increase fees for access to state parks when there's more people going there, receiving the same benefit of access to our state parks.
Commissioner Stroman.
Chair Heinzman and Representative Schultz, on your first point, let me just also say that the budget requests we have in this budget are ongoing needs. And so to pay for them with one-time funds is a Band-Aid. It doesn't pay for the ongoing programs. So that is the other reason we want to pay for ongoing things with ongoing dollars, not one-time dollars, and then have to come back and hope we get more one-time dollars. So that is part of the other reason there. To answer your second question, state parks are funded through a mix of sources. So the fees do not cover the full cost. So even though there are more people paying fees, there are more demands on the services. So it is not increasing the proportion of the total operating costs of state parks. The general fund is still an important piece of it, but we are not seeing a full increase in a general fund operating increase for the state parks. So we are fulfilling part of that with a proposed fee increase, but it does not cover the full cost of operating the parks.
Commissioner, I have next up Gilman, Jacob, and Hanson, but I think what Representative Schultz was also driving at was, while there are increasing costs, and they're addressed in your report, and you're pointing out that those increased costs need to be addressed with ongoing increased resources to cover those in perpetuity, I suppose. I think the idea or the concern might be that there hasn't been maybe the cuts we were hoping for that also would potentially have an impact going forward if there were a place where there could be found to be an opportunity for cost savings. And so I hope that is taken to heart. Representative Gilman.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for this presentation today. Nice to see you. I do want to just talk a little bit more about the fee proposals. As you mentioned, the surcharges for the boats, you gave us the common, 17-foot boat or less would increase from 1060 to 25. What is the rest of the sliding scale? What happens if, I know someone who has a 23-foot boat?
Commissioner.
Chair Heinzman and Representative Gilman, I think that our CFO is looking for the full chart. So, and we can certainly provide that to the committee so you
That'd
have
be
it on
nice.
paper. But if there is a specific, maybe you could just run through a couple other examples,
Yeah.
Mary.
Ms. Robinson.
Mr. Chair, Representative. Just a few examples here. For sailboats up to 19 feet, that would go from 1060 to 1433. That's an 89% increase. For pleasure craft 17 to 19 feet, it would go from again, everything currently is 1060 to 2933. So it does vary, and in general, the larger the boat, the larger the increase. And as the commissioner said, we can provide the full table to the committee.
Fabulous.
Representative Gilman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much. And also, you mentioned the University of Minnesota, the AIS research. My question around that, too, is have you noticed, has that gone up with the, contributing to that? I just was wondering, like, from a biennium ago to now, was it ongoing funding, or has it just dramatically gone up, or what is that, where is that at, too?
Commissioner Stroman.
Thank you.
Chair Heinzman, Representative Gilman. So the Research Center at the University of Minnesota has been historically funded more through one-time funding, whether it's been through the LCCMR or heritage enhancement dollars. And so, they're a really important part of our approach to preventing the spread of aquatic invasive species, understanding what causes the spread, how do we combat it. And so, we strongly believe that stable ongoing funding for them is a really key part of our success in Minnesota. And so rather than have the university come in with their requests and DNR come in with requests, we did what I think was the right thing to do and came in together and said, let's make sure that the surcharge addresses, each of those things I said, the needs of local entities through grants, DNR's capacity, as well as the University of Minnesota's capacity. And I think it actually makes it more transparent for Minnesotans who are paying that fee. They can see here's the whole piece of, how we're funding Minnesota's approach to AIS.
Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Chair Heinzman. So on your Parks and Trails Legacy Fund page, you speak about creating new and expanded outdoor opportunities and connecting people to the outdoors. And again, on the fee increases, can you explain to me how fee increases from $7 to $10 or $35 to $45, how does that dovetail with creating expanded outdoor opportunities? It seems like that would be a financial burden that would do just the opposite.
Commissioner.
Chair Heinzman, Representative Jacob. So it's a great question. And as I said earlier, so the traditional Parks and Trails funding, the combination of the fees and the general fund, that is what funds our basic operations in the parks. And so periodically, in order to keep up with the pace of rising costs, we either need increased general fund appropriations for operating adjustment, or we need to raise those fees, or some combination of both. The fees have not been raised in a number of years. As I said, we were here 2 years ago, asked for that increase. We didn't get it, so we're back. We need to catch up for that basic operations of maintaining. The Parks and Trails Legacy Funds, as part of that constitutional fund, those funds, we cannot use them for general operations. We cannot supplant traditional sources of funding. Those have to be used for things that are above and beyond basic operations. So we use them for things like building the new campground, the Shipwreck Creek Campground at Split Rock Lighthouse State Park. We use them for reintroduction of bison at Minneopa State Park. We use them for programming, things that under a basic operation scenario, we would not be able to provide to Minnesota visitors.
So Commissioner, would you be saying then that DNR does support the fees and fee increase mechanism for users of state resources?
Chair Heinzman, I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question. We support a fee increase. It's in our budget proposal, but I'm guessing that's not your question.
There is a user group that doesn't pay fees when accessing some of our quite expensive infrastructure. You can probably
Got it.
guess where I'm going with that.
I do.
Commissioner.
And, Chair Heinzman, what I will say to that is we actually a couple of years ago launched an initiative called For the Outdoors that is looking at ways that we currently fund outdoor recreation and conservation in Minnesota, and potential ways that we could augment that, and looking at revenue sources from other users, looking at goods that are not currently taxed for the outdoors but have an outdoor nexus to them. Are things that Minnesotans came and talked to us about that might be possibilities. So we are exploring those kinds of things, including, various either alternatives to the way our fees are structured now, or supplements. So that is a conversation that we have been having both internally and with Minnesotans. And we're happy to have it in more detail with this committee or individual legislators as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. With proposals coming today and the introduction of the governor's budget and the ask for fee increases, it just seems bizarre that there are those that see a zero cost using what is, like I said, very expensive infrastructure. Representative Jacob, I interrupted your questioning. If you had more.
I do have one follow-up. So, and also fee increases, looking at the proposal of your increases in water usage rates from $140 to $200 per permit at a time where the ag economy is just very depressed, and even like a 10% increase would be a big increase, but this is a tremendous jump from 140 to 200. How do you justify that kind of increase in fees at a time where an industry is struggling as hard as it's struggling?
Commissioner.
Chair Heinzman and Representative Jacob, I appreciate that. The other side of that issue is one of the things that we are hearing from people who are applying for irrigation permits is that the process takes too long. And part of the reason it takes too long is particularly in parts of the state where our groundwater resources are less abundant. There are a lot of maybe high-capacity users. It's really important that we understand the capacity of the aquifer, who the users are, to make sure that we are permitting and allocating where there is sufficient water resources. And so, as I said, the complexity in the technical analysis is increasing, and that means the process takes longer. And so by increasing the fees, we can build the capacity to do that work more quickly so that folks aren't bottlenecked when they apply for their irrigation permit, which also has a cost to them. So that's the other side of the coin, and we are trying to be responsive to some of the concerns that we're hearing from those users.
Members, I have a list next. It's Hanson, Nelson, Burkle, and Jordan. And Commissioner, I didn't mean to be so cryptic, and members and potentially the public. I was referring to those that might be like my family that enjoy the tremendous opportunity to be in, say, for example, the Cuyuna rec area and the mountain bike trails that are there. Bikes don't directly have a registration like a boat or other users around the state. And so I think it should be at least a part of the conversation. Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be brief. Two quick questions, and whether you have the ability to answer those now, maybe follow up. But one question is about Bedora Nursery, and the reason I'm asking this is, in combination with bonding. So what's done, what needs to be done, what is funded, what else is there to do? Those are the basic questions there, and because I think the intent was that we would try to get that done. And so that's one. And then the second one is on bird flu, and if there is any outreach plans, one with the turkey hunting industry to maybe have turkeys tested, or even just basic for backyard bird feeders if they've got dead birds that appear. Is there some way of working with the Raptor Center or testing, or just trying to get a handle on the wild bird flu potential as we move into spring?
Commissioner.
Chair Heinzman, Representative Hanson, to the question about Bedora Nursery. So there were a number of phases to modernizing that facility. We are working through the first phase. We are then we'll move to the second phase. Both of those phases are funded. The third phase is the containerized stock. That is a little bit further out. That's a very high level response to that. We can certainly provide more detail to the committee on that, and our Forestry Division Director is here too if anyone wants more specifics. To your question on the bird flu, I'm going to see if Assistant Commissioner Meyer is aware of any plans that our Fish and Wildlife Division is undertaking.
Assistant Commissioner, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Mr. Chairman, members, for the record, Bob Meyer, Assistant Commissioner, Department of Natural Resources. We are in ongoing conversations with the Board of Animal Health and others to make sure that we're working cooperatively and together on this issue, much like we did last year, working with others to provide education, what to do when you do find dead animals, dead birds, and how to communicate that to us and others, so we can provide what we're doing in more detail in our response back to the committee with some web links as well. Very important issue that we're trying to work cooperatively across all sectors with.
Representative Nelson, but before I go to you, I just want to quickly point out to the committee, we kind of need to get wrapped by about 2:15, so please keep that in mind. After Representative Nelson, it's like I said, I think a few minutes ago, Burkle, Jordan, Finke. Representative Nelson.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Stroman, for being here. And, one of the things that, people love trails, getting outside and seeing new trails is really fun. One of the concerns I have in my area is we've had a trail there for quite a long time, and it's really getting in poor condition. And what is, kind of what is the ratio or what is the budget for repairing trails versus building new? Because I think that's something that we need to make sure that is a big part of our discussion is, it's a lot more fun to have a new trail than a repaired one, but, the repaired trails are very important, so to that.
Commissioner.
Chair Heinzman and Representative Nelson, we would agree with you. We understand people always like building new trails and new segments of trails, but that maintenance is incredibly important. So that is always one of our priorities in bonding bills is that maintenance component. We also get some LCCMR funding for those kinds of things. So that is also a very high priority to us, and I would say more so than building new.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I would just also thank Representative Nelson for bringing up an issue that I think most folks in the room and probably a lot of those watching know that myself and a lot of others are working on this. And we do have some proposals that address ongoing maintenance because the question does come up, especially when bonding is often the go-to suggestion for how do we maintain this infrastructure, and it's just, it will never be enough. There's going to have to be a dedicated source of revenue for maintaining trail and park infrastructure. Representative Burkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this question might be, it's kind of reference an answer, Commissioner, you gave about CWD and finding new cases. And I'm just going to wrap this up with your uncommitted general fund balances. And maybe this might actually be a question for the Assistant Commissioner, but we visited before about the what I think is the justifiable frustration with folks in the deer farm industry about farm inspections. So, and secondary fencing. And I know we've talked about having a meeting at some point soon, but could you, just referencing the Commissioner's answer, those instances were not on deer farms, correct? And then and I'll follow up. I'm just curious.
Commissioner Stroman or Assistant Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, members, thank you. Bob Meyer, Assistant Commissioner DNR again. Representative Burkle, they were not found on deer farms. They were found in similar areas, North Dakota, Minnesota border, and central Minnesota. New cases that came up that we're trying to use our movement studies and research to determine how are these just popping up in some cases, right? So continued work on that is really important.
Representative Burkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, I agree, totally important issue. We need to really focus on how this is moving and where it's coming from. But just to the deer farm inspection budget here, I'm curious, looks like unencumbered and unspent is about half of the money, just a little less. Moving forward, is it something, I mean, how many folks do you have, how many COs do you have out inspecting? How does this work out?
Assistant Commissioner.
Walk me through the process.
Mr. Chair, Representative Burkle, we have a relatively small staff working on this. There's 2 COs and 1 Fish and Wildlife staff with occasional staff from the field coming in to help. There's approximately 70 deer farms right now that we're responsible for inspecting on an annual basis, so that workload is there. That fund balance that was appropriated for these activities were to do that work and other deer farm related work for a number of years. I think the slide says it's available till 2029. So there are actually operational dollars so that we aren't paying for these expenses, so that deer hunters are not paying for our deer farm work. So it was critically important when we talked about that. And just one other item to note is we are using those funds to pay for CWD testing on deer farms, on mortality. As you recall, we did expand the dates, the ages of the animals we wanted to test on deer farms to go to 6 months. But it used to be a year, so that mortality between 6 months to a year is obviously more greater than what you see after a year. So making sure that we're able to provide those test costs while those funds are available is one of our priorities.
Representative Burkle.
One quick follow-up, and I know you want to cut things off. So thank you for the answer. That answers a lot right there with the testing. But I'm just curious, just any comments you might have on the secondary fencing issue as my deer farmers understand it, and what your thoughts are moving forward on how to solve that issue.
Assistant Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkle, as we talked before committee, I know you had this issue up in the Ag Committee the other day. It needs to be clarified and worked on. As we know, no two farming operations are alike, so every one is different and unique. We need to provide them the ability, like a menu, so to speak, on options that do preclude that nose-to-nose contact, however we can. So working with producers to do that, while making sure we have statute language that that is flexible yet firm enough, if that makes any sense, as those of you who write statutes and language. Janelle is kind of laughing, but we need to work on it. We need to provide more information. We have a one-pager that we use, a document that we share with producers right now, but on the bottom is a disclaimer, because we cannot do unpromulgated rulemaking, say this versus that, 5 strands of electric wire versus 8-foot sheets of plywood, which wouldn't work, but high string fence, tensile fence, things like that. So being flexible yet making sure we're preventing that contact is where we need to go, and we look forward to working with you and your committee and Representative Hansen's committee to do that as well.
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone from the DNR for being here. I guess also thank you for all the work that has been going on CWD. It's something that's very alarming to myself and to deer hunters that I talk to. I've talked to some in Wisconsin, and they mostly say, do not let your state become our state. So thank you for not letting us become Wisconsin. My question is around, this won't shock you probably, but around some of the public safety preparedness and the legal costs. Are any of the legal costs to support previous litigation, or is this just for anticipated upcoming legal costs that the DNR might have, or is it to pay for previous litigation costs?
Commissioner.
Chair Heinzman, Representative Jordan, it would be to pay for ongoing as well as anticipated litigation. So it might have been litigation that started previously but is ongoing.
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then for the public safety preparedness, can you talk a little bit more about what that training is and what that looks like?
Commissioner.
Yeah, Chair Heinzman, Representative Jordan, and Colonel Smith is here if you want more details. But at a high level, there have been a number of times and continue to be times when our conservation officers are called to assist, whether it's county sheriffs or state patrol in general public safety response. Those types of situations tend to have a look and feel and issues. They may have settings that are different than those that our conservation officers normally work in. So it is important that they train for those kinds of scenarios, those kinds of settings, including if they are, potential First Amendment related issues, they need to be trained in how to, respond while protecting First Amendment. So there are specific trainings for those kinds of scenarios that they would not ordinarily receive as in their conservation officer training, and then certain types of equipment as well for deployments that might, again, look different than what they normally do. So that is, at a high level, is what that entails.
Representative Finke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't want to get on the list. I was just thanking you for clarifying your question.
Representative Finke, thank you for thanking me. Commissioner, I had a couple of workforce-related questions just as we're kind of winding down, and then we'll wrap with Co-Chair Fisher. Going back to the slide where we're talking about operating adjustments and employee contracts and how they are settled. So I'm wondering, when are employee contracts settled versus when the DNR's budget is enacted? I think that would help the committee and maybe others watching to better understand how these increases are coming. And I'm wondering also if that comes in terms of enactment before, during, or after you know how much you have to spend for a biennium, because that's certainly going to have an impact on what ultimately the decision is here in this committee on your budget.
Chair Heinzman, I'm going to have our CFO respond to the question both in terms of timing and then sort of what we include in our operating adjustment request.
Ms. Robinson.
Thank you, Ms. Chair Heitzman, members of the committee. So as you point out, collective bargaining typically happens after budgets for agencies are settled. And in terms of our operating adjustment projections do not include any additional collective bargaining that hasn't happened yet, including any cost of living increases that might be agreed to at that time. The only thing that's included in the operating adjustment calculations that we do are step increases for existing staff. So for those people that are already employed at the DNR, there are designated steps based on labor agreements and contracts that happen each year, and that is what is projecting in that operating adjustment calculation. As the commissioner mentioned, the operating adjustment, as it is included in here, does not actually cover the full cost of inflation over the biennium due to fiscal concerns in the general fund. So it actually covers about half of the projected step costs over the next biennium as proposed.
Okay, I kind of thought that might be the case, so I'm glad to get clarification so members have a better idea what we're looking at going forward, especially with a challenging budget. It's been, for some time now, we've known that we were dealing with a deficit, and over the last year, we've seen that deficit continue to grow on the horizon. Representative Schultz, you had a very quick question along these lines. I think you want to follow up.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. So over the last 2 years, agency employment increased by 52 employees. Do you have a projection as to where your employment numbers will be agency-wide for the upcoming biennium, or where your budget reflects in that regard?
What's that one, Ms. Robinson?
Mr. Chair and Representative, in terms of the budget in front of you, all of the proposed changes include a total increase of 16 FTE. Those are mostly supported by the fee increases. There are 4 FTE supported by the general fund ask related to the gas leasing and permitting. Otherwise, we have no plans to increase our budget substantially over where we are now. The operating adjustment is based on our current staffing complement.
Co-Chair Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Heinzman. Thank you, Department, for the presentation today. I know that some of the things that are looming on the horizon is that you were referencing in a number of the accounts that we've got federal funds coming in. It's hard to predict what's going on, but it looks like in some of these programs, if we start losing federal funds, that will have a significant impact. Does that eventually put us in a situation where a lot of these positions are funded by federal grants? Does that mean at a certain point we may have to be laying off people if we lose these funds down the road?
Commissioner.
Chair Heinzman, Chair Fisher. So yeah, as I noted, federal funds do make up a portion of DNR's budget, somewhere between 3 and 10%. It varies, as you saw, too, by division. So federal funds tend to fund very specific programs. As of right now, we are not seeing major hurdles to receiving those federal funds. So we are, of course, monitoring, but also hesitant to speculate on, what may or may not happen.
Chair Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Heinzman. Thank you, Commissioner, for that. I do appreciate that the issue around CWD was raised. The new sightings that we've had in other parts of the state. This is something that I'd like to get more information on that, what's happening in, how are you detecting, how are you doing follow-up on that? That's a big question, because when we're seeing these one-offs happening, is that because we're not doing enough monitoring? Do we need to do more testing out there in these areas?
Assistant Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, members, Bob Meyer, DNR again. I think what we're seeing, it's a combination of things, but the tools that we've expanded on with the legislature's support and approval, like going to our taxidermy network. Several of those new responses or new identified cases came through taxidermists. So trying to expand our testing, we've done mail-in kits as well. So continuing that upfront approach about testing as many animals as we possibly can, providing as much flexibility as we can, I think is leading us to some of these new cases, and then continuing that surveillance work within that area. So for example, when we do find a new case, we establish a 15-mile circle radius zone for testing. Deer feeding bans are another thing that we put into place in those areas. And then if they cross into counties, we work on that. But making sure we're putting all of our available tools in a rapid response kind of mode, if possible, when the early detections are found, has been most useful for us, and continued that front and making sure we have the resources available, looking at the science, working with our partners, working with Minnesotans. If we weren't able to work with the deer hunters in the state to provide those samples, we wouldn't have that information. So making sure everybody understands how important it is and continuing that testing and surveillance is one of our keys for sure.
Chair Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Heinzman. And thank you, Assistant Commissioner Meyer, for that. And then the last thing I want to kind of just touch on, I don't need an answer now, but something for the department to think on, is I know that tribal relations is very important and that you folks have been working real hard to build better relationships. And at the same time, I'm still hearing concerns from tribal nations that it's still, they don't trust you folks as much as we'd like to see them trusting you. And so I just want to kind of put that out there is for you folks to take a look and try to think of different ways to try to approach and it feels like help repair some relationships that might be out there. It just, and where I was picking up some of this is when I'm was reading all the tribal responses on the GTAC report and hearing from some of the tribes afterwards, it just does not feel like a very positive working relationship sometimes. So I just want to put that out there saying, here's what I'm seeing. I don't need an answer to that right now, but want to take a look at that as we go down the road and connect with you folks so we can take a look at what's happening there.
Commissioner, you'd like to address that? I'm guessing you're going to mention your tribal liaison that is at DNR.
Yeah, Chair Heinzman and Chair Fisher, I appreciate you raising that issue, and I do want to say and assure the committee and anyone else who may be listening that Minnesota Department of Natural Resources takes extremely seriously having solid and good tribal relations. We have now at the Minnesota DNR a Director of Tribal Relations, Bradley Harrington. He's been with us now a number of years. And more recently, we have added both a Dakota Relations Liaison and an Ojibwe Relations Liaison. So we now have a team of 3. They are working very hard both at working at external relationships between the department and tribal nations, as well as building capacity for understanding of tribal concerns within the department. And that is including actually developing some new DNR-specific tribal relations training that is really exciting. The other thing that I just want to note here is, working on natural resource issues between a state agency and the tribal nations is incredibly complex. We share resources across the state of Minnesota. And so if you look at what our state statute says about how state agencies should act in tribal consultation with tribal nations, it says decisions that impact significantly tribal nations. That is the vast majority of decisions we make at the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And so clearly, we cannot consult at a leadership level on every single one of those issues, right? And so there is a lot of figuring out what does that mean in the context where we are literally sharing resources and making decisions together. And the reality is that's going to play out with every single one of our federally recognized tribes in Minnesota because they're each unique. So, that will take some time. We are committed to doing that. And so I just want to let you know and let others know we are working on that. It is a work in progress, as everything is, but we are committed to making those relationships stronger, and many of them are very, very strong.
Thank you for that answer, Commissioner. And as we get to that point, we're going to have to close out. I'm going to thank you all for coming today and for the presentation, Commissioner, Assistant Commissioner, Ms. Robinson. I will leave you with this, that this committee, like all, I think, committees that are having to address a budget and are looking down the road and recognizing along with that responsibility, we do have a $6 billion looming deficit, a deficit we've known about for well over a year. And while I appreciate that there are some suggestions in terms of cuts, I think that all of the chairs and co-chairs are wanting to see a continued effort to find, in some cases, and maybe in the DNR's budget area, more significant opportunities to try to reduce costs going forward in spite of increased costs and increased responsibility. We are going to have to figure out how to do more with less. And in some cases, there may be some solutions, and I alluded to that a little bit. I hope that there's bipartisan support to have ongoing revenues available for taking care of our infrastructure. And I look forward to working with all stakeholders and both sides of the aisle to be a part of solutions. So thank you again for the testimony today. And members, we are going to leave it there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We look forward to working with you as well.
Next up on our agenda, House File 737. Representative Olson. Representative Olson, as you are not a member of this committee, I will move the House File 737 be laid over for possible inclusion in a future bill. And I would invite you to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the committee. House File 737 is the cadmium paint bill. If you look at me, you might say that guy can't possibly be a painter, and you would be correct. I am not a painter. The last time I painted a picture was probably elementary school. I had a constituent call me this last summer, and he said, Representative Olson, last session we passed a bill through the MPCA agency bill that inadvertently outlawed the use of cadmium paint for artistic purposes. Now, for those of you who don't know, Western art culture is heavily dependent on this form of paint. There is no alternative that can provide even close comparisons. You can get close with the colors, but the illumination and the ability to overlay the colors on top of each other is an impossible. They currently don't have those capabilities with any other form of an alternative. So Western art culture depends on this. I had an artist from St. Paul call me and told me that half of the paints that he uses for his profession are illegal. He can't purchase them here in the state. And so this bill is an attempt to rectify that. We're going to hopefully be able to continue Western art culture here in Minnesota. My constituent told me that this is the only government in the universe that outlaws cadmium paint for artistic purposes. The European Union, which is definitely known for its good environmental practices, they make an exemption for cadmium paint. Sweden asked the question of whether or not this would be, like, if it was a good idea. They said, I don't think we should do this. And Sweden, they did a study and they found out that this, in fact, does not carry the toxic levels. It should not be a concern for us, and that's from Sweden. So this bill would continue Western art culture, keep us moving in the right direction, and being able to, I guess you could paint if you're a real painter, but in my case, just look at the paintings and enjoy them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Olson. Just a reminder to testifiers, as we might have limited time here, try to keep it to 2 minutes. I'm not going to pound the gavel, but try to keep it as close to that as you can. First is Tom Jacobson. I completely misread your name. Next up is Tom Johnson, Government Relations Director. Introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And for the record, Tom Johnson, Government Relations Director for the MPCA. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on House File 737. Want to thank Representative Olson for the continued conversations on the bill. I also want to thank all the various stakeholders who have engaged at length with the agency on this topic. And also, thank you, Chair Heinzman, for hearing the MPCA's report previously in the session on products containing PFAS, lead, and cadmium, which makes recommendations regarding writing instruments and key fobs specifically, which are covered in this bill as it was amended in the Commerce Committee. So because the committee's heard that report, I won't spend a lot of time on that, but just the MPCA does stand by its recommendation on ballpoint pens, that there be a 3-year extension, and that is appropriate but not a complete exemption. mechanical pencils have alternatives of regular wood pencils as well as plastic mechanical pencils, so the MPCA stands by that recommendation as well. And then the report also evaluated lead solder and key fobs and found that lead-free alternatives are available and in use today, but more time is needed, so also a 3-year extension for key fobs and other products using lead solder in the covered products under the law. The two areas covered by House File 737 that were not considered in the report were artist paints, of course, the main point of the bill, and then key blades, which were stricken from the underlying statute. And regarding paints, the MPCA appreciated the recent conversation we had with the Arts and Creative Materials Institute. We recognize that alternatives may not exist for certain specific professional paints and are committed to continuing work through language with the industry to determine what exactly the scope is. Of course, the MPCA is concerned that there's still some exposure, so as long as we can find a narrow scope for exactly what products need to be exempted, we're happy to continue to work on that. And then finally, Mr. Chair, I want to acknowledge that key blades have been the most challenging topic here. The MPCA is working to understand why there continues to be testing by MPCA and MDH that shows that there are some lead-free alternatives that exist. Meanwhile, we are receiving information from the industry that shows there aren't alternatives that exist. And I think because this was not a topic that we worked directly on in our report, we're still evaluating all of this information. However, again, there are MDH, Department of Health testing, as well as MPCA testing that has shown lead-free keys. And yet, I'm sure you're seeing a large amount of testimony here, written testimony and report that shows that it's not feasible. So we continue to work with the industry, and as this bill is being laid over, we're happy to continue to work on this language with you, Mr. Chair, and the committee and the industry groups. So thank you for the opportunity to testify. Happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Director. And I think the question remains on the key issue, as there's been conflicting testimony and some challenges trying to make sure that that technology is at that point where it is ready to be made available. Next up, we have, I think, David Johnson. And Mr. Johnson, you can be thankful that Tom Johnson came up sooner and I butchered his last name and not yours.
A lot of Johnsons out there, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify. My name is Dave Johnson. I'm a partner at Faegre Drinker. Represent two key manufacturers, Dormakaba and JMA USA, as well as a key distributor for the hardware industry, Hillman. Those two entities manufacture about 60% of the keys in the United States. As we've testified in previous committees, the bill that passed in 2023, we believe effectively bans all keys in the state. Some background on keys. All keys, included plated ones, are made of brass and contain lead at levels between 0.9 and 1.5%. This is chosen as the metal of choice because of its combination of strength in use and ability to be machine cut. And it's important to understand that the cores of those keys are also made of the same material. And if the material itself is harder than what's in the core, that causes issues for wearing out the lock mechanism. And if it's too soft, it causes additional issues. So the keys and the key cores need to be made of the same material. The law passed in 2023, in effect, bans every blade-style key and key fob in the state. It also effectively prohibits the sale and use of keys for the following applications: houses, offices, businesses with keys, to unlock or access property, keys for all motorized vehicles, including new and used cars, boats, motorcycles, ATVs, UTVs, golf carts, etc., as well as hardware and other things. And in the interest of time, I won't read the entire list. I know that also members have some information from those industries in the packets. What I'd say with respect to alternatives, first off, is we have been talking to the MPCA, and we appreciate those discussions, and we will continue to have those discussions. I think the issue is that we have not been able to identify alternatives. We have provided the department with a study, which was some early results in Europe that basically showed that a couple things. The importance, first of all, of the core and the key being the same material, but more importantly, that below the Minnesota standard in effect would be so low that the key would not work. The second piece of it is that even the alternatives that, because the industry is actively exploring alternatives, that the alternatives that were tested in this study would not meet the Minnesota standard. And Minnesota is the only state other than California that bans lead and cadmium in keys. Our standard is significantly more stringent than the California standard, and the industry can meet the California standard. One last point, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions because I want to be mindful of time. But I think some of the disconnect with the agency is a study that the Department of Health did where they used a testing method that is different than the one on the MPCA's website for compliance. They tested keys using a surface test, and the plated keys ended up being the ones under our analysis of the test that I think the department thinks are alternatives. We, having manufactured those T keys and actually tested those very keys, the plating is just the surface, and the core is made of the same material. So the plated keys do not meet the standard, and we think that if the same test used in the DH study or the same test used for compliance purposes was used on the keys in the DHS study, they get a different result. But we, as I said, we are looking forward. I have been in communication to get an additional meeting. We are continuing to work through it, and we hope we can find a path forward. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Next up, Scott Fairs.
Hello.
Would you please introduce yourselves for the record as you proceed with your testimony? And it's good to see both of you again after previously appearing, I think, in Commerce. So,
Thank you, Chair.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, representatives. I'm Scott Fairs. This is Darren Rennie. We own Wet Paint Art Supply on Grand Avenue in St. Paul. Wet Paint's been selling art materials on Grand for about 50 years, coming up next year. Darren and I have been involved for about 35 of those. We have 19 employees. And in addition to the store on Grand, we sell online. We sell to the rest of the country and internationally. We have a close relationship with the art and art education community locally and nationally, and with the manufacturers and distributors in the industry. Cadmium pigment, mainly found in oil, acrylic, and some watercolor paints, is a standard color on an artist's palette. The color names on the paint tubes are things like cadmium yellow, cadmium red deep. Artists look for the word cadmium on the label and pay a premium for it. It's not used in cheaper paints as a filler due to the extraordinary cost of the refined pigment. 37 mil tube runs between 25 and 75 bucks. Our manufacturers are small factories in places like Portland, Oregon, upstate New York, Amsterdam, Dusseldorf, Osaka. And they take extraordinary care in making it for their own safety and because the quality of the pigment is expensive and it can't be wasted. There's not a replacement for cadmium pigments in artist paint. Artist color is priced based on pigment availability, and the art supply industry does not make their own. They buy it from the same place as the other industries. So while it used to be common to use cadmium in industrial plastics, car paint, jewelry, and ceramics, that's really not so much the case anymore. Tube of cadmium paint, red, is 3 to 7 times more expensive than the other colors on our shelf. There are paints called cadmium hue. They're for sale right now. They're cheaper alternatives. They're made by mixing other pigments to try and get the tone and color right. And the color mixing properties as close as possible to the real thing. And when you squirt them out of the tube, the hues are a close match, but when they mix with other colors, particularly white on the palette, they immediately fail to soften and cover in the same way. They're either not as opaque as true cadmium or not as warm as true cadmium or both. And that's why real cadmium continues to outsell the available replacements significantly, despite the cost. Minnesota is the only place to have banned the sale of cadmium in artist paints, including California, including the EU. So our customers that want cadmium colors are ordering online wherever they can get it. Some are driving to Michael's in Hudson. It's about 15 minutes away from our store. In an Instagram post about the situation, one professional we know who regularly shops with us showed us his haul. And so in addition to the cadmium tubes, he went ahead and picked out all the other colors he needed at the same time. That's a $400 sale that should have been in St. Paul, but it was in Hudson. And unless we plan to stop cars at the border, it'll pretty much take that business away from the few art shops that are left in the state of Minnesota. Our customers in other states will just buy from wherever, because who cares? Wet paint's currently no longer in the national marketplace for professional art supplies like this. Blick is. Their warehouse is in Galesburg, Illinois. St. Louis Art Supply is. Amazon is. Everyone is, unless you have a business that's based in Minnesota. So thank you for considering an exemption to the ban for this specialized use. It will serve the art community of Minnesota and allow our business to remain competitive. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Fairs. I believe next is Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm Bill Moran. I've appeared before the committee before in connection with the report that was issued regarding writing instruments by the MPCA. I represent the Arts and Creative Materials Institute and the Writing Instrument Manufacturers Association. There are two specific exemptions or exceptions that are in current House File number 737 relating to ink pens, mechanical pencils specifically high-end mechanical pencils used by architects and engineers and draftsmen. And then also with regard to the artist materials that Mr. Fairs, I think, so eloquently addressed in his comments. The statute, I think, with regard to those two items, the writing instruments and the artist materials, reflects the unintended consequences of the breadth of the statute. As we know, there are 15 very broad product categories that were banned by the statute. You go into the legislative history for the statute, there is no legislative history referencing any scientific methodology used to establish that litany of products, nor is there any scientific information setting the levels of cadmium and lead to be prohibited or setting the limit on lead and cadmium. During the course of the last year and a half, my organizations have worked with the MPCA submitting scientific studies that have been done in the EU, scientific studies that have been done in the United States, specifically addressing the precise issues that we're talking about for this bill. In the EU, for example, tips of writing instruments are exempted from the lead limitations of products. The CPSC, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, also has removed writing instruments from their lead limitations. The EU has also conducted an extensive study in response, as Representative Olson referenced, to a request for a ban of cadmium in artist materials to the EU. And following that request for a ban, the EU undertook an extensive study and concluded that a ban was inappropriate. There are no measurable health risks presented by these products. The science is now in the record. Science was not in the legislative record back in 2023 when this was first promulgated. It's in the record now. The MPCA has not come forward with any contrary or contradictory science to the conclusions of the valid and tested elements and methodologies undertaken for those studies. I would request that this committee lean into the science, as is the MPCA should be leaning into the science rather than disregarding it as it's done in this case. And for that reason, we would request that this committee seriously consider those amendments and pass them forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Elliot Siegel. Please
you,
introduce
Chairman
yourself for the
and,
record. Go ahead.
Commissioners. My name is Elliot Siegel. I'm a toxicologist, and I'm here testifying on behalf of the ACMI and WEMA, the Arts and Craft Materials Institute, and the Writing Instruments. I'm going to first talk about cadmium and lead in art supplies. Lead is rarely used in artist paints and pigments, and with very few exceptions, the lead content of art materials currently comply with the Minnesota statute or more stringent lead content requirements through the ACMI program to ensure compliance with federal and other state restrictions. It's important to understand that many modern cadmium pigments are encapsulated or bound within a matrix, making them relatively insoluble and not bioavailable, resulting in a much lower risk than raw cadmium levels. The cadmium content found in art supplies, while exceeding the limit created by the statute, does not pose a significant health risk to children or users of the products. In order to properly evaluate the potential long-term health concerns arising from exposure to adults and children to cadmium in professional art supplies, the available scientific literature needs to be considered. As we've already heard, the country of Sweden proposed a regulatory restriction to the European Parliament in 2013, intending to limit the level of cadmium in artist paints within the European Union. In response to this proposal, the European Chemical Agency conducted an assessment and found that the proposed restriction was not justified from a public health perspective. The Swedish concern related to the potential for humans to be exposed to cadmium from artist paints via the food supply. During use and brush cleaning procedures, cadmium-based artist paint can be released to the wastewater as it could be poured down the sink, thereby making its way into the food chain via crop uptake. ECHA determined that the removal of cadmium from artist paints would result in a minimal reduction in food-related cadmium exposures. It's also important to understand that finished ceramic products, like a mug or a plate or something like that, are subjected to food safety testing through the FDA requirements. Testing of products such as ceramic flatware, hollowware, cups, mugs, pitchers, and assorted products like that have shown low levels of extractable lead and cadmium and are in compliance with FDA requirements. Most pigments containing cadmium is in an encapsulated form, as I mentioned. Bioavailability and bioaccessibility is a major factor in determining the toxicity of compounds taken into humans or animals. If an ingested compound is unable to cross the wall of the gut and enter into the body, then its capacity to cause a toxic effect is very small. Therefore, bioavailability is an important factor that should be considered when considering the level of exposure from any chemical in any consumer product.
Mr. Siegel, if you could wrap, that'd be good. We're getting to the end here.
There are several published papers that have compared the relative bioaccessibility of lead and cadmium from pigments and have shown that encapsulated forms result in much lower exposure.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. Representative Olson, I believe there is an author's amendment to your bill, the A4, and if that's correct, could you describe what the amendment does?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So whereas I would love for this bill to be in the current language that it is and make its way to the House floor for a vote, I chatted with the Chair Fisher last night. I'd proposed a couple different amendments to ensure that this would receive the due diligence that it would get and also have the best chance of survival and enactment. And so last night after deadline, that's why you see there are two author amendments. After deadline, spoke with Chair Fisher, and we determined that the best case for this, the success of this bill, would be to lay it over here in committee, but also to take the A4 amendment and at that point in time, put it in a potential omnibus bill.
Members, does everybody have the amendment or have had an opportunity to look at the amendment? If so, I would move adoption of the A4. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The A4 is adopted and before the committee. Members, any questions on the bill as amendment? Representative Finke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Olson, for this bill. I want to take a minute and just sort of talk about this bill. This is a bill that reminds me at least, and hopefully all of us, that there are no small bills, right? Everything we do has very important consequences somewhere, and sometimes we don't realize that. I'm like the author. I am a painter. My painting is supported by this job, so I actually don't buy cadmium level paints because we don't make a lot of money. But I have been painting for a long time, and I've had a lot of conversations about this bill. I spoke with the owners of Wet Paint. Thank you for being here. That is my favorite art supply store in St. Paul. And I took a really long time deciding what I wanted to do about this bill because I don't want to create exemptions for toxic chemicals. I mean, that's just not what I want to do. But this bill runs right up against another very core value of mine, which is about the value of arts and artists. And I think it's important to like reflect on how these things marry. And when you introduced the bill, I was initially supportive, and I'm not supportive and very grateful that we took the keys out, because I do think regardless of the keys issue, it is a separate issue. You know, the US government has shown that there is no safe level of lead. But there is, you know, there are levels of cadmium, right? If you get down to the small enough, fine enough areas that are shown to be, it's just a different conversation between lead and cadmium, as far as I'm concerned. It means a lot to me to be able to find ways forward with people. It's very important to me that Wet Paint and other art stores which are endangered here find a way to continue to live. So I am going to support the bill when we get it to wherever it lives. If we keep it cadmium and away from expanding our lead levels. I appreciate you doing this. I appreciate you speaking and representing for the value of the arts. That's one of my main legislative priorities here is funding for our arts communities. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity. Thank you to all of the advocates who have made sure this didn't get lost. And in the future, if we ever do find that cadmium paint replacement, then let's talk about this again. But for now, we have to save Western cultural art and its history. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time.
Thank you, Representative Finke. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I was just left with the greatest questions for the MPCA as it relates to the topic that we addressed in the amendment. So I wanted to ask if Mr. Johnson knew if there were lead-free alternatives that the MPCA has already identified.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Schultz. So far, what we have shown in our own testing is we've tested a number of different types of keys, car keys, door keys, et cetera. We've tended to find several car keys specifically that are lead-free. And so exactly what composition those are, I know we've sent a couple of keys into the lab. I don't have results there yet, but to give to the committee right now. But we have done our own testing and have seen some lead-free examples. What exactly the composition of those are, I think that's where we're engaging with the industry, who generally has the best idea of what's out there. And again, in those conversations, I think we've heard from the industry that those alternatives don't exist. And I think we're just trying to grapple with that. Not saying that anything from the industry isn't true or factual. I think all those have scientific underpinnings. It's just we're seeing different things in our lab. So.
Representative Jordan, you're going to get the last question. We're going to try to finish on time.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is to the author. On line 1.16, you keep in ink pens and mechanical pencils. I guess so I just want to say that was something that the MPCA did identify other alternatives to on the market. So that is not affected by the amendment. I just want to confirm that that is staying in the bill And I will also just note that the MPCA has identified market alternatives, so I would like to see that being addressed going forward, but can you just confirm that those remain in the bill and are not affected by the A4 amendment?
Representative Olson.
That is correct, Mr. Chair and Representative Jordan. According to the current amendment as we have drafted and just accepted, you have the exemptions only for ink pens, mechanical pencils, and all that laundry list of particular cadmium art supplies that I don't understand all of.
Co-Chair Fisher, we seem to have about 30 seconds. If you had anything, I don't want to miss an opportunity. All right, members. I will renew the motion that House File 737 as amended be laid over for possible inclusion. We did okay on time. Members, I will also move that we adjourn. We are adjourned.